here's Brody Brazil.
You know, it's kind of crazy right now with Major League Baseball that you've got a handful of American League teams alone that are searching for either a brand new stadium or even a brand new city to play in. And since you're here on this channel, I'll automatically assume that you're somewhat familiar with the Oakland A's situation. They've been approved by Major League Baseball to relocate to Las Vegas. There are some other things still to be determined and maybe sitting in the way, but as far as baseball is concerned, that's been approved. In the case of the Tampa Bay Rays, there is a proposal, there is a plan to stay in St. Petersburg, but none of it has been approved at the local government level yet. I'm talking city or county. Then there's the Kansas City Royals, who have not one, not two, but three different proposals for ballpark sites around Kansas City. They've got plans and renderings to go with all three of them, so they're desperately trying to get away from the aging Kauffman Stadium. And now enter into the conversation the Chicago White Sox, who made it clear last baseball season that they are trying to get away from guaranteed rate field. It's just not cutting it for them in terms of a business, and what they're trying to do, they say, to secure the future fate of their franchise in Chicago literally forever. They think that this site right here, just south of downtown and just west of Lake Michigan, this is like their forever home. And at first glance, I got to tell you, that's an amazing piece of property right there. How has that remained open? How has that never been developed by anybody or anything else? And there have been some challenges, there have been some ideas and plans that never came to fruition here. I'll detail that later in this video, but my goodness, I don't even need a rendering to figure out in my brain what a beautiful location that would be for anything, but obviously a baseball stadium for the Chicago White Sox. Okay, there are renderings out there in the wild, but you can also kind of tell because of the quality of these and maybe the dating of them, if that makes sense. Like, I don't think these are brand new. I think these have been out for a bit. I'm not sure to what degree and how serious they were, who put them together, but they do exist and they are being passed around, not on any official level, but like I said, they're out there in the wild on the internet. What a beautiful site, just south of downtown. There's kind of a look from, I suppose that would be east looking west. That would be amazing. Kind of like the style of the ballpark. It's got maybe the old Comiskey feel with a second deck. It's a lot closer to the playing surface, and you're right there on the riverfront of Chicago. And again, I'm passing these along not knowing where they originated from or what the source on this is. Maybe it was at some point official by the Chicago White Sox. I'm not saying any of this is current or to be believed, but it kind of lets you know in your brain of what this project could ultimately shake out to be like. Here's the very latest via the Chicago Sun-Times. Like, here's why we're actually talking about this right now. The potential site at Roosevelt Road and Clark Street is owned by Related Midwest. Company president Kurt Bailey wouldn't comment, nor would White Sox spokesperson Scott Riefert or Jason Lee, a senior advisor to Mayor Brandon Johnson. Johnson and Sox chairman Jerry Reinsdorf said in a joint written statement in response to questions, quote, "We met," the White Sox and city officials did, "we met to discuss the historic partnership between the team and Chicago and the team's ideas for remaining competitive in Chicago in perpetuity," end quote. As in forever. Like I said before, the White Sox here are going to use that claim that this is bound to be their forever home. And again, when you take a look at that site, it is so beautiful. It is so perfectly set. It's got good dimensions. You can build a baseball stadium there. There's plenty of other land. Let's learn more about it. It's a 62-acre plot of land. It's right on the Chicago River, on the riverfront there. They say it has eluded development over the years and decades. As I said before, several projects have been proposed and pitched and talked about, but nothing actually got greenlit and no shovels were really in the ground to build anything there. It's owned by that company, Related Midwest. I'm not going to pretend to know anything about them or what they're interested in doing with this, or potentially selling it to the White Sox or selling it to Chicago, or who's going to pay for this ballpark. We're not at that point yet. But they call it the 78 neighborhood, as in what would be Chicago's 78th different neighborhood. That's why they call it the 78. And again, kind of in this just prime spot. Right across the river is a big rail yard. In fact, there's a rail line that runs kind of on the south side of this rectangular shape of 62 acres, but that should not impede a ballpark from going in there at all. Usually railways and ballparks, so long as you get the pedestrians over or under them or across them, it's not necessarily a big deal. But this seems like a perfect location for what they're trying to do. The question is, can they build a ballpark and something else there? The Chicago Times was talking about that other plans for this site in addition to a baseball stadium. Mark Gannis is a Chicago-based stadium consultant. They interviewed him, and the Sun-Times said this: roughly 12 to 14 acres would be needed for a baseball-only stadium, seating 35 to 38,000, Gannis said. Instead of surface parking, the White Sox could build a parking structure, though its exact capacity would vary depending on size, and not all parking would have to be on site, he said. Let me quickly take this opportunity to remind you that in Las Vegas, the A's have an agreement for 9 acres of land. They initially said a 30,000-seat stadium. It's been bumped up to 33,000. Here in Chicago, on a 60-something plot acre of land, they'll need at least 12 to 14 for a couple more thousand seats, 35 to maybe 38,000. Just gives you some perspective here that maybe that's more of a realistic space to capacity ratio, acreage to capacity ratio of what a Major League Stadium facility might look like. Anyway, in terms of sharing the site, yeah, plenty enough land to build this ballpark right on the riverfront and also put something else on the site. There was the previous debacle, and all of this is kind of important looking back to understand the future moving forward. The financing for the current ballpark, Guaranteed Rate Field, they used to call it New Comiskey, that came in actually after a midnight deadline in the year 1988, right? The White Sox, they were very much threatening to move to Tampa. Baseball hadn't granted Tampa an expansion franchise yet, and a bunch of different teams, the Giants, I think the Mariners, the White Sox, all at different points threatened that they were going to go to Tampa and be Tampa's new team. The city of Chicago saved the White Sox with this after midnight deal, after deadline deal in 1988. It was very controversial. They got involved in funding a new stadium, but there was the imminent threat that the White Sox would leave if this stadium deal wasn't passed. And so New Comiskey, as they called it back then, it opened up in 1991 right across the street from the historic Old Comiskey Ballpark. And in a number of different ways, I'm not from Chicago, I don't live there, but the ballpark has seemed regrettable ever since. Maybe the opportunity to change locations, right? They're just right west of the Dan Ryan Expressway. Maybe move to a spot like this. They didn't do it. They built just south of the old ballpark. Or maybe in a sense that you think about ballparks of the early 90s and specifically Camden Yards. Guaranteed Rate Field, New Comiskey, was the last non-throwback ballpark design, if that makes sense. There's not a lot of brick and mortar and old school dark green seats. In fact, they used to be, I think, light blue when Comiskey first went in. It was supposed to be more of a futuristic ballpark instead of the old throwback ballparks that they still make today, and it's very popular with baseball fans. So the design, the location, the feel of this stadium, I mean, it's only been up since 1991, not even that long, and people in Chicago are already remorseful about it. It's basically already lived its service life. And so with the current lease that the White Sox have at Guaranteed Rate Field, they only pay $1.5 million per year in rent. They've got that pretty good. The team also gets all sales from tickets, concessions, parking, and merchandise. So they've got a pretty sweet setup right now. Obviously, a lot of that would change if they choose to buy into this site. And again, the details on acquiring this site or public money for this site or who's willing to give up this site. Look, White Sox officials and Chicago officials and apparently the landowners all got together and had this conversation, had this very high-level meeting. I don't know that that means any of this is necessarily moving forward. The word and the term that was thrown around is serious discussions about the White Sox calling this their new home. But it's important to remember we've seen and heard serious discussions with a lot of teams and a lot of sites over the years that never panned out for one reason or another. Certainly, I hope for Chicago and Chicagoans that if this is what they want, I mean, to me, somebody on the West Coast, that looks beautiful. If I'm in Chicago next time and there's a stadium there, I would love to visit that. I've obviously been to the current White Sox ballpark a handful of times too, but I hope for teams to stay in their cities. This is only about 3 miles north of the current ballpark, maybe to some very hyper-local businesses. This is not what they want. But generally for Chicago, if a great deal can be put in place, if the White Sox are willing to be the backbone of that, so long as everybody in Chicago and Illinois agree, I mean, yeah, I'm just rooting for Major League Baseball teams and pro sports teams to not have to be uprooted from where they're from or threaten the community. In this case, for the White Sox, it's only about 30 years since it seemed like they were bound to leave in the first place. All right, you made it here to the end of the video. You know I appreciate that. Thumbs up down below. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so I can definitely see you back here next time.